So, that said, that is one of the reasons why I've organized this deck into the different god classes, and I'll just look briefly at those. We've got the Protogonoi, which I mentioned, which are those very basic elements. Pontos, the sea; Gaia, the earth; Tartaros, the underworld. So those Protogonoi are the very primal elements. And each one of these different god classes, in working with the cards, in doing readings with the cards, has a different function. So how I've conceived the Protogonoi in this deck is that they create a nuance, an elemental nuance to the other cards. So most of you know about the principles of earth, water, air, fire, the elements, the four elements. These Protogonoi expand those elements a little bit. There's the elements of darkness, which is night. Darkness, night. Then of course there's light, which is fire. There's the sea, which is water. There's the heaven, Uranos, which is air. There's Gaia, which is earth. But then we've got the principle of down and the underworld. The principle of the underworld is very powerful. The opposite of down or the underworld is the sky, which is Uranos. So Uranos is that principle of upwards. And as we go deeper into this work with the cards, that'll start to make sense. Uranos as a nuance, for example, is about elevating something, elevating the energy of another card. Tartaros might be about debasing it on the one hand, on a negative level, but on the other hand, it's about taking it deeper and giving it roots. So that brings a different nuance into it. Nyx, for example, night, is about darkness, not being able to see. Not darkness in the sense of evil, but darkness encompassing something so that you can't perceive it, that you need to maybe stand back and wait for the light to return. So, of course, these nuances, these principles relate very strongly to the elements, the basic elements, but they start to form a language that can help you read the cards, and not read the cards because you've memorized what each and every card means, but to start to understand what the principle is, and then start to learn to put those different principles together. Next, and I'm actually not doing this in order, and I'll explain why in a moment. So we start off with the Protogonoi, which are the cosmogonic elements. And then we've got the Titans. The Titans are the children of Gaia and Uranos, with two exceptions. Two of the wives who are actually nymphs of the other Titans I've included because of the marriage, because they're important. But what I've done here with the Titans is these relate to the cosmos. They relate to the astrology. So with the Titans, we've got an astrological correspondence. So each different god or goddess has got an astrological glyph. You can see here on top, here's the glyph of Pisces for Oceanus. And I have figured out a way to create a correspondence between the Titans and astrology. So number one important point is it's a correspondence, and the correspondence does not mean that it's exactly the same thing. So there's an astrological kind of communication between, let's say, Oceanus and the principle of and Pisces, but it's not exactly the same. But when you do readings, that Pisces might become an important feature in the reading. So that's why I like to add the different layers of symbolism to these cards so that we can create a richness of reading. Because in any form of reading, be it the tarot, be it these cards, there's kind of a universal meaning, but then there's a lot of nuances, and there's a lot of different levels of reading, and there's a lot of symbols that come into it. And of course, those symbols still relate back to the universal meaning, but they just give a different nuance and they give a little bit more information. So the correspondences here are with astrology. If astrology is something you know or understand or are interested in, that would have meaning for you. If not, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know astrology or learn astrology to do that, but it might be a useful tool to add if you are serious about learning astrology or learning to, work with doing the readings of these cards. And of course, obviously, these cards can be read in conjunction with the tarot, for example, or they can be read in conjunction with an astrological chart, or with the runes, or with I Ching. These different systems really do tie into one another because they all work from the same principle of synchronicity. And we'll talk about synchronicity and how readings work in future lessons. This first lesson is just really about the basics and about understanding where this all comes from and fits in. So these titans then relate to astrology, and in terms of a reading as a nuance, I see these as kind of things in the world that you can't change, or things in the world out there that are set. Okay, that doesn't mean that you absolutely can't change them, but they're kind of out there, and they kind of are part of the furniture of our reality. And yeah, we've got to figure out the ways to get around those if those are obstacles. They could be, a help in our lives, but those are kind of the things out there that are set on some level. And then with the Olympians, in contrast to the Titans, the Olympians are about the personality. They are about our personal interaction with the world, our personal self-understanding, and what we can do about that. So what you'll see, for example, on the back of the cards, I've got a personality aspect here with Zeus. Here at the bottom, I've got a personality aspect. And that's got a negative expression and it's got a positive expression. And that, of course, is because there are these different ways of expressing this energy of Zeus. As I said before, Zeus could be this philanderer, or Zeus could be this very regal figure who has absolute clarity and order in his life. A philanderer doesn't really give the impression of having very much order or self-control, whereas the purest expression is very much about that self-control. Zeus is kind of about the sky, the heaven, that creates the backdrop for everything, and the order, the order of the movement of the stars, the order of the movement of the sun and the moon. So that's the higher expression. And of course, when we work with our spiritual relationship to these gods and goddesses, we're going to go for the higher expression, obviously the archetypal expression, which is the most pure and the most universal. So these cards have a personality expression here, and because the Olympians were the gods and the goddesses that were most written about. Okay, we can say they were the gods and the goddesses of the most recent expansion, of different peoples. They were kind of systematized by the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example, by Homer, and by later writers. They kind of started to put them into a system. Even though we had very ancient gods like Dionysius and Artemis, they kind of worked them into fitting into the system. And those main gods were the Olympians. The 12 Olympians were the main gods of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Then there were the Titans and the nymphs and the others that were maybe more local or that had other nuances. But the 12 Olympians are the main gods and goddesses. That said, there were actually kind of 13 or 14 Olympians. And in my deck, I've got 16. And the reason why I've got 16 is, first of all, Persephone and Demeter as mother and daughter are usually conflated. They're kind of different expressions of the same energy. But, they do stand alone, and I wanted to kind of separate them so that we could work with some of those different nuances. And then another one that usually stand together are Aphrodite and Eros. And Eros himself, in this case, he is Eros Phanes. The reason why I've done that is because this principle of love, of Phanes, of unconditional love, is one of the Protogonoi, one of those basic elements. But even the Greeks acknowledged that there was the what they called old man Eros, which was the primal god Eros. And then there was Eros, which is the Cupid, which is the mischievous god that makes people or gods fall in love with each other. So that's kind of a different, that's kind of more of a metaphor of the principles of love and sexual attraction. So I've kind of put those two together. So Eros Phanes is both a Protogonos as well as an Olympian, even though as an Olympian he is kind of conflated with Aphrodite. So that kind of eliminates two there. That's, two of the 16, so that takes us down to 14. And then Dionysius and Hestia are sometimes, the official 12 gods includes Hestia, other times it includes Dionysius. Dionysius was an extremely popular god as the god of wine, of ecstasy, of vegetation, but a lot of the state religions didn't acknowledge him because he was such a degenerate and because he really was about breaking down the social order. So in some places his worship was banned, but he was so overwhelmingly popular that eventually they had to unban him anyway. And he again is that survivor of the most ancient religions that are most connected to the earth. And he then, his mystery initiations remained constant throughout all the years. Even when the mystery religions were at their most developed, he remained central to the initiations. So Demeter and Persephone are linked specifically to the mysteries of Eleusis in Athens, and other gods are related to the other mystery religions. But Dionysius as the vehicle of transformation is kind of fundamental to all of those different mystery religions. So he's kind of an unofficial member of the Olympian 12. So we'll talk more about that. And what I'll do throughout the course is we'll focus on the Olympians for a lot of the time, getting to know those energies. The myths focus on the personality aspects and characteristics, and then focus on the archetypes as a form of spiritual transformation. And we'll work mainly with the Olympians also in our spiritual devotional development of a relationship with these archetypes. Obviously, if you feel very strongly about another god or goddess in this devotional aspect, that's absolutely fine to work with that. But the Olympians tend to have greater nuances, greater depth that make them more interesting to work with. And as I said before, maybe in the time to come, think about what you think could be your main archetype in your life. How do you always react? What is your kind of factory setting way of responding to situations? And then on the other hand, look at how can you develop, or do you want to develop other characteristics, other ways of being that sort of help you develop the areas of your life that you want to develop. So that's really what this, the devotional aspect is something that's, kind of independent of the mythological and factual aspect. But the devotional aspect is our personal relationship and growing into those archetypes, understanding them on a visceral level. For all of you who've worked with me, my belief that we can only transform when we have a visceral experience. We can do psychotherapy, which is mental, and we can do that for years and years and years, and there's no big change. But when we do the visceral work, which is through teacher plants or breath work, we get that deep body experience. And when we get the body experience, we know something to be true. We know a shift to be possible. The same goes for the gods and goddesses. It's like when we know the facts about an archetype, it's one thing. When we have a deep visceral relationship with them, it's another. And again, that brings us back to the cards. The cards are obviously information in the pictures and all sorts of different information here on the back about the myths and about the different affirmations and the divinatory meanings. But those are also words, those are also factual. So we want to get to know the cards, and that will be your first kind of homework and exercise with the cards, is to actually sit with a deck without reading, you can read later or you can read at different times, but do an exercise where you actually sit with the cards, where you look at the pictures, and maybe you start to create your own associations. Maybe you want to put all the mothers together, or all the figures that look like mothers, or maybe you want to put all the different gods or goddesses into categories of, these look like they are gods and goddesses of light and of spiritual growth. These look like they could be the gods and goddesses of resistances or of struggle. These look like they're more, let's say, civilized and intellectual. These look like they're more kind of based on the earth and about fertility and creativity. And start to develop this just intuitive understanding based on the pictures and based on a feeling, and to start to, in that way, organize these cards. Because again, at this stage, they're like, 39 cards, potentially cards that you have to learn all the different meanings. And we don't want to focus in the beginning on the facts. We will work with the facts as we go through the course, and it will be important to learn the facts. The facts aren't trivial. It's like, for example, Hephaestus and Ares are both gods of fire, but that doesn't mean that they're the same thing. Or let's say Hephaestus and Hestia are both gods of fire. Hestia is more about cultivating the inner fire. Hephaestus is about using fire to transmute and transform through alchemy. So, those aren't the same, even though they're within the fire category. So, those facts will start to help create definitions and separations and boundaries that are necessary. But beyond that, it's the intuitive experience that also is important for creating this relationship. And so spend time with the pictures. You might want to then, once you've got a sense of where these pictures fit, you might want to then start looking at the backs of the cards. And a very good place to start, a very simple place to start, is either this little key phrase at the top here, which just gives a little bit of an abstract meaning of what that energy is about. Or otherwise, you might want to look at the affirmation that's at the bottom, in the box at the bottom. The affirmation is kind of putting that god or goddess energy into a nutshell in a way that can help you transform your life, obviously informed by the meaning of that god or goddess. So that can be like a simple start to creating a relationship with these gods and goddesses. And definitely what I suggest on that note is to draw a card a day. And draw a card in the morning. My suggestion is that you work with a journal. So you'll write your date, you'll write the card that you drew, and then without reading the back of the card, look at the picture or get a feeling, try and connect into the energy of that archetype, and just write down some intuitive understanding about what that is. What does the picture say? What does your gut say? What does your heart say? What sensations do you feel? Maybe you feel physical sensations, or maybe something happens. So write those down at the beginning of the day. And then at the end of the day, you can go back and then you can read the card. And it doesn't matter if you already know more or less what that archetype is about. But then at the end of the day, go back and read the divination, read the mythology section of that. And maybe then you start to see some of the ways in which that energy played out in your day. And obviously, especially that could relate, or that would be more clear with the Olympians, because the Olympians have got the personality section here at the bottom. So it might be nice to then look back on your day and think about, what was your mood like? What was your reaction to other people like? How can you relate that to the positive or negative aspect of that Olympian that you drew? Sorry, and by the way, I didn't actually make this clear at the beginning. So the Olympians are those 12 gods, the sort of last wave, who were related to, Zeus being the king of Mount Olympus, and that's why they're called Olympians. The Titans are called Titans because they're the children of Gaia and Uranus. And then the Protogonoi are the primal gods. They're the most primitive elements, the most basic elements. Protogonos in Greek means the firstborn. So they were the firstborn gods. Then the Titans came, and then after that the Olympians were kind of a subsection. I didn't really go into it because we don't have time, but even within the mythological stories of the creation, and maybe we'll look at that more next time, there is the story of the primal gods, and then came the Titans, and then the Olympians overthrew the Titans, their parents. They overthrew that realm, and they created their own new kingdom, which was based in Olympus. So my suggestion is maybe in the beginning, especially if this all seems very overwhelming, to work only with the Olympian gods as your cards for the day. And you can work with the 16, and what you'll find as well is each card has on the back, you'll see here, there is a relating it to a king or queen. And that's kind of a little bit more of a tarot influence relating to the court cards. So for example, Zeus is the king of air, Hera is the queen of air, Athena is the youth of air, and then Hermes is the child of air. And that relates to the king, queen, knight, and page of the tarot. And I've kind of divided the Olympian gods into the 4 elements: earth, water, air, fire, and it actually fits quite well. The gods of air, Zeus, Hera, Athena, Hermes, are sort of the intellectual faculties, the ruling faculties. The gods of fire and light are Hephaestus, Hestia, Apollo, and Ares, and those are about the light and the fire of transmutation. And of course those have got a king, queen, youth, and child. And then the gods and goddesses of water, which are Poseidon, Hades, Aphrodite, and Artemis, are about our relationships, relationship to ourself, relationship to the world. And then the earth gods are Dionysius, Hades, Persephone, Demeter. Those are the gods of the underworld, and they are the underworld initiation. They are the seasons of the earth, the rebirth from winter into spring. But we'll talk more about those elements in future lessons, obviously relating them to the Olympians. And that's, of course, another way of kind of breaking down the gods into different elements. So if you know that Hermes is a god of air, you'll understand a little bit more about him just from the fact that he's a god of air. Being a child, means it's a slightly less mature or authoritative energy, so that also tells a little bit more of a story about him. Then from there, the symbolism, and then from there also your intuitive interaction with that god or goddess. So the first step in getting to know these cards is to spend time with them. Look at them, look at the pictures, interact with them, create the different classes that you might want to do, just from an intuitive perspective, and then definitely do the daily cards to not only get to know the cards, to get a feeling at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day to reflect, but also as like a mirror of your day to sort of help you give some more information about your day, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you could have done, and also just maybe helping you understand some of the events of the day. Good, so that closes our session for today. Obviously, being the introduction, it's a lot more background information. In the next sessions, we'll go more into the individual gods and how to do readings more, and we'll do specific work with the devotional aspect, which is developing these relationships and a spiritual connection with these divinities. So thank you for joining us, and we'll chat soon.